Spanish horror doesn't just build suspense, it traps you in a heavy, inescapable fog of ancient guilt and religious dread. During the twilight of a restrictive regime, the country's genre filmmakers learned to cloak their subversion in the shadows of crumbling castles, Gothic ruins, and isolated coastal villages. What emerged was a highly distinct style of cinema one, where medieval folklore met modern graphic violence, and where the sins of the past literally crawled out of the earth to claim the living. Tonight, we're crossing the Atlantic to explore the macabre landscape of classic Spanish horror. These are the films that traded standard Hollywood pacing for dense, suffocating atmosphere and striking, surreal imagery that lingers long after the tape stops spinning. From the relentless slow-motion terror of sightless Templar-knights to subterranean tombs hiding centuries-old family curses, these stories represent a golden era of Eurocult dread. Step inside the crypt as we take an unforgettable journey through the dark world of Spanish horror.
The House That Screamed, 1969. Long before modern American slashers codified the rules of the genre, director Narciso Ibáñez Serrador delivered an absolute masterclass in slow-burn psychological tension with this highly influential cinematic triumph. Widescreen tracking shots and deep natural shadows build a cold, clinical atmosphere where every quiet hallway feels like a trap. Every single frame is meticulously composed, creating a sense of rigid architectural dread that mimics the school itself. This strict geometry heightens the growing feeling that the characters are being watched from every angle. Set in late 19th century France, the story unfolds inside a highly strict, isolated boarding school for troubled young women run by a cold, domineering headmistress who rules with an iron fist. The atmosphere of severe discipline turns genuinely sinister when students begin systematically vanishing from their rooms in the dead of night, leaving absolutely no trace behind. As the remaining girls grow increasingly paranoid, a dark web of voyeurism and institutional cruelty begins to unravel, pointing toward a silent, knife-wielding predator hunting within the school's walls. The mystery unravels with cold precision, letting the psychological torment of the students take center stage before unleashing its final terrors. Lily Palmer anchors the film with an incredibly commanding, chillingly stern performance. Celebrated by genre purists for its razor-sharp script and an infamous jaw-dropping climax, this is a beautifully shot, essential piece of Spanish horror history. Tombs of the Blind Dead, 1972. The image of skeletal, moss-covered knights Templar riding resurrected horses in agonizing slow motion is one of the most striking visuals in the history of Eurocult cinema. Director Amando de Ossorio doesn't rush the terror here. Instead, he traps you in the desolate, sun-bleached plains of the Iberian Peninsula, using the crumbling stone ruins of real ancient monasteries to build a heavy, suffocating atmosphere of medieval dread. The visual texture feels incredibly tactile, making you feel the heat of the Spanish sun and the damp chill of the ancient tombs. The filmmaker lets the silence stretch out, forcing the viewer to sit with the mounting tension before the monsters finally strike. The nightmare begins when a modern vacationing trio ignores local folklore and wanders into the rural outskirts of Berzano, a cursed village abandoned centuries ago after a corrupt order of crusaders was executed for practicing dark heresy. When the sun sets, these blind, cloaked monstrosities X-ray the darkness, clawing their way out of their desecrated graves to hunt exclusively by sound. The film relies heavily on its incredible sensory design, prioritizing the chilling, rhythmic clatter of skeletal hooves and a terrifying low-frequency chanting soundtrack that completely rattles your speakers. This is a brilliant masterwork of 1970s Spanish horror, packed with unforgettable atmosphere and a bleak, unrelenting climax that sets the gold standard for Eurocult dread. The Murder Mansion, 1972. If you love the aesthetic of vintage pulp paperback thrillers, this fog-soaked exercise in classic Gothic mystery plays out like a vibrant, live-action Spanish comic book. Director Francisco Lara Polop buries the entire production in an ocean of thick artificial fog, The visual design is incredibly striking, utilizing sharp angles and sudden zooms that make every corner of the screen feel loaded with malice. The set design itself becomes a character, with every dusty room looking like it was pulled straight from an old-school Hammer horror production. A diverse group of travelers gets completely lost along a desolate stretch of rural highway and seeks shelter inside a sprawling, seemingly abandoned estate sitting right next to a decrepit cemetery. The tension immediately skyrockets when they discover the mansion is occupied by an eccentric old woman and her mysterious chauffeur, who claim the house is actively haunted by the vengeful ghosts of local witches. What follows is a series of brutal nighttime executions that systematically targets the survivors. Anchored by a stellar ensemble cast, this is a wonderfully atmospheric hidden treasure that perfectly bridges the gap between old-school ghost stories and early slasher tropes. The Blood Spattered Bride, 1972. If you have a taste for the more transgressive, surreal side of European horror, The Blood Spattered Bride is an essential find. Directed by Vicente Aranda, this Spanish production reimagines the legend of Carmilla through a lens of extreme repression, psychological disintegration, and Gothic obsession. The plot centers on a young woman who, immediately following her wedding, finds herself trapped in a remote country estate with a husband who is far more interested in his cold, archaic notions of authority than in her well-being. It is a suffocating atmosphere, designed to feel less like a marriage and more like a gilded cage. What separates this film from the myriad of other vampire stories released in the early 70s is its unflinching willingness to blend eroticism with genuine dread. When a mysterious, liberated woman, the titular bride, appears at the estate, the protagonist is drawn into a cycle of seduction and violence that serves as a visceral critique of traditional patriarchal expectations. Aranda's direction is strikingly composed, utilizing vibrant colors and dreamy, deliberate pacing to contrast the stark, violent outbursts that define the film's darkest moments. It is less concerned with traditional monster tropes and more focused on the transformative power of desire and vengeance. Ultimately, the film functions as a stark, haunting parable about the stifling nature of societal norms. While it may lean into the exploitation tropes of its era, there is an undeniable sophistication to its storytelling, particularly in how it portrays the burgeoning intimacy between the two female leads. It remains a deeply atmospheric, sometimes disturbing piece of art house horror that bridges the gap between Hammer-style period pieces and the more confrontational, avant-garde cinema of the 1970s. For anyone interested in how the vampire mythos can be repurposed to explore contemporary themes of liberation, it is a uniquely chilling experience. Return of the Evil Dead, 1973. Amando de Ossorio wasted absolutely no time returning to his legendary franchise, trading the wide-open ruins of the original for a dense, dark labyrinth of isolated village streets. This sequel functions beautifully as a high-stakes, frantic siege movie that completely ditches the slow-burn approach for pure, kinetic survival. By dropping the ancient monsters right into a populated, claustrophobic setting, the film dials up the chaos significantly. The plot kicks off during a local centennial festival celebrating the historic day the village ancestors executed the notorious Knights Templar. The party turns into a complete bloodbath when the sightless, skeletal riders arise from their nearby burial grounds to exact a centuries-old vow of absolute vengeance. As the undead army surrounds the perimeter, a small, desperate group of survivors barricades themselves inside a reinforced stone church, frantically reinforcing the doors as ancient swords begin hacking through the wood. The camera work here embraces a much more frantic, immediate energy, utilizing intense handheld tracking shots to capture the pure panic of human prey trapped in a corner. It's a faster, meaner, and far more action-packed installment that stands as an incredibly satisfying, crowd-pleasing slice of 70s drive-in grit. Horror Rises from the Tomb, 1973. This is the definition of unhinged, blood-soaked 1970s Spanish exploitation. Director Carlos Ared discards all mainstream restraint, utilizing garish, high-contrast lighting and a relentlessly fast-paced narrative rhythm that moves at a breakneck speed to deliver a movie that demands to be seen late at night. The sheer volume of ideas thrown at the screen ensures there is never a dull moment. It shifts effortlessly from historical tragedy to full-blown surrealist nightmare without ever pausing to catch its breath. The incomparable Paul Naschy delivers a legendary, career-defining dual performance as both a heroic modern descendant and his own ancestor. Alaric de Marnac, a sadistic 15th-century French warlock who was brutally decapitated for practicing dark occult rituals. Before the axe fell, Marnac placed a permanent curse on his bloodline. Centuries later, a group of friends returns to the ancestral estate to conduct a seance, accidentally unearthing Marnac's still-beating heart and severed head. The resurrected warlock immediately uses mind control to force the local villagers into executing a series of gruesome, cannibalistic human sacrifices. The film pulls no punches, filling the screen with a chaotic mix of medieval torture devices and surreal, dreamlike violence. It's earned a permanent cult status for its absolute fearlessness, packing the screen with reanimated corpses, psychedelic dream sequences, and some of the most shocking practical gore effects of the era. The Ghost Galleon, 1974. For the third installment of the Blind Dead franchise, Amando de Ossorio takes his skeletal monsters out to sea, turning a low-budget nautical setting into a delightfully claustrophobic, fog-draped ghost story that plays like a late-night TV creature feature. By shifting the environment to the open water, the franchise taps into a classic, old-school pirate lore aesthetic, while keeping the core monsters exactly as dangerous as you remember. It provides a highly entertaining change of scenery that gives the series a distinctly dreamlike quality. The plot sets sail when two beautiful models are hired as a publicity stunt to launch a new boat, only to get lost in the Atlantic and collide with a massive ancient wooden galleon that materializes out of thin air. They quickly discover that the decaying ship is a floating purgatory manned by the immortal, resurrected skeletal corpses of the Knights Templar. When a rescue crew is dispatched to find the missing women, they board the ghost ship and find themselves trapped in an inescapable floating wooden maze where the undead riders stalk the narrow corridors by sound alone. The set design carries a heavy, weathered charm, with rotting wood and tattered sails framing every single encounter. Leaning fully into studio-bound dream logic, the film buries its miniature ships and wooden deck sets under a permanent thick layer of artificial fog. It delivers a wonderfully fun, highly animated B-movie energy that perfectly captures that nostalgic, late-night tape rental vibe. Belle from Hell, 1973. Operating entirely on its own bizarre wavelength, this deeply surreal psychological thriller rejects standard horror tropes to build a bright, deceptively beautiful countryside aesthetic. It contrasts lush green Spanish landscapes with a deeply pitch-black sense of humor and striking avant-garde editing that keeps the viewer entirely off balance. The film values unsettling mood and thematic irony over standard jump scares, making it feel closer to an art house experiment than a traditional midnight movie. The narrative follows John, a highly eccentric young man finally released from a psychiatric institution after being wrongfully committed by his scheming aunt and her three beautiful daughters. Rather than seeking immediate physical violence, John returns to his family's sprawling estate and begins executing a highly elaborate psychological war of nerves against them. He transforms the entire property into a bizarre, living funhouse of traps and strange art installations, all centered around a massive, newly installed church bell in the backyard that signals their impending doom. Renaud Verlet delivers a mesmerizing, brilliantly volatile performance as John. The movie has achieved a legendary tragic status among Eurocult collectors due to its chaotic production history and its incredibly striking poetic use of practical violence. It remains a completely unique artifact of the 1970s Spanish underground. Night of the Seagulls, 1975. A young doctor and his wife arrive in a remote coastal village to take over the local medical practice, only to discover the community harbors a dark secret. Every 7 years, The villagers sacrifice young women to ancient creatures that emerge at night, drawn by tolling bells and centuries-old rituals that no one dares break. Directed by Amando de Ossorio, Night of the Seagulls is the fourth and final entry in the Blind Dead series. What it lacks in the iconic imagery of the earlier films, it compensates with a pervasive sense of dread and a community horror setup that predates the Wicker Man's influence on the genre. Victor Petit and Maria Costi play the outsider couple with appropriate bewilderment and mounting horror as they realize the village's true nature. The locals, bound by fear and tradition, are portrayed not as villains, but as victims of a curse they're too terrified to challenge. This moral complexity gives the film unexpected weight. These aren't evil cultists, just desperate people making terrible choices. De Ossorio builds tension through atmosphere rather than action. Fog-shrouded beaches, crashing waves, and the ominous sound of bells cutting through the night. The creatures themselves are effectively grotesque creations that feel genuinely ancient and malevolent. The ritualistic sacrifice scenes are staged with Gothic formality, emphasizing ceremony over exploitation. The film serves as a somber conclusion to the Blind Dead saga, ending the series on a quieter, more fatalistic note. It's less about spectacle and more about inevitability, the weight of history and how some evils become so entrenched that breaking them seems impossible. Who Can Kill a Child? 1976. A quiet vacation turns into something unspeakable in this deeply unsettling Spanish horror gem. A British couple travels to a remote island off the coast of Spain, searching for sun and peace before the arrival of their third child. But what greets them isn't paradise. It's a town frozen in silence. The shops are empty, the doors stand open, and the only inhabitants left are the children, smiling with an eerie calm that grows more sinister by the minute. Director Narciso Ibáñez Serrador transforms the idyllic setting into something nightmarish, using bright sunlight and open spaces to heighten the unease. There's no darkness to hide in here. Every scene feels exposed, and that's what makes it terrifying. The horror builds slowly, more psychological than visceral, as the couple realizes the true nature of the island's nightmare. It's a story about guilt, human cruelty, and the terrifying idea that innocence can become its own form of violence. Few films from the 1970s feel this morally charged or confident in tone. Serrador weaves tension like a documentary of decay, capturing something primal and unforgettable. Long after it ends, the question in its title continues to echo. Not as a challenge, but as a haunting reminder of what people become when reason gives way to fear.
Thanks for watching. If you have your own memories of these films or a hidden gem we missed, let us know in the comments below. We're building this collection together, one film at a time. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is somebody's favorite.